One. Welcome to our Facebook Live. We're excited today to be back and within the blue. We've got our returning guest today with Joseph Stith, and he's back because he set a record for our In the Blue broadcast. He's the first one to break 1,000 views in just a week, which way to go, Joseph. We're proud of you, buddy.
Thank you.
So good to have you back on the show. And I've even had doctors reaching out to me telling me, oh my gosh, the stuff he shared was so good. And the next time he's on, please let me know because I want to use that stuff. And to our audience, I just want to share with you, remember, BlueIQ is all about bringing you tools of scale. And these little mini meetings, they're short. We're trying to keep them 20 minutes for you so that you can use these in your team meetings. You can use them with your team. Use them for team trainings. These are free, guys. Use and abuse them. And the information that Joseph's been sharing with us is decades of leadership training. And says these are the 4 motivators every leader needs for victory. And this is a cool presentation, and especially knowing Joseph's background and how he kind of came up with these 4 motivators is pretty fun. So Joseph, we're going to turn the time over to you. Super excited for you to present today, and welcome back to the show.
Thank you, Cory. It's a pleasure to be here. I don't talk a lot about my military history because it's, for the most part, never really all that relevant. But today it is, and so I'll share just a little. 6 years in the Marine Corps, infantry. I was fortunate enough to spend 6 years during Vietnam and our first major conflict overseas. I think when the bombing of Kuwait, and so I was training young men for combat, and didn't have the opportunity to see any myself. But the last 2 years that I spent in the Marine Corps was on the drill field. We call it the drill field, where I was training Marine recruits. And so we give them a little bit of everything from combat training to leadership training. But that's where leadership really took its hold on me, and I wanted to continue to do that, like, for the rest of my life. And so as I went into leadership consulting and coaching in the dental world and the medical world, I kind of developed these 4, I call them the 4 critical motivators, but some of these you might not even think about as being motivators, but they're absolutely essential in leadership. And if there's one thing we can focus on in healthcare, it's our leadership skills, because we go to school to learn how to fix a tooth or improve the health of a body, but we don't spend a lot of time in school talking about how to lead a team, and that's the first thing a doctor has to do, or an office manager. And so let's just start with what I consider the first motivator, and that is, believe it or not, water. You wouldn't think of water as a motivator, but water is what I consider praise. I use water as the illustration for praise, because praise is like troops will leave the battlefield, they will leave the front in search of water, and we tend to view praise as like dessert, like we can't give them too much. In fact, I've actually had doctors express their concern that if they give too much praise, they're afraid that someone's going to ask for a raise. Has that ever been a concern of yours? Has that ever been?
It is, because then the team member think, well, I'm exceeding the doctor's expectation. They're so happy with me. This is a good time to corner him in his office.
That's right.
Her office.
And so that can create a little bit of a problem. But at the same time, there's 2 things that we all share. as human beings, and those two things are a need for acceptance and a fear of rejection. And praise addresses all of those because we all need it, and yet we're afraid to offer it. Sometimes it's because the data isn't clear enough. But nothing boosts morale faster than praise, but it's often too scarce. It needs to flow like water, and it's just that healthy. Just as water is healthy for us, praise is just as healthy as well. But we're often awkward in how to share that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Especially us doctors, because a lot of us doctors are problem solvers, and we're so busy looking at the solution to the problem that the team is presenting
Mm-hmm.
that we're
Mm-hmm.
we're just giving suggestions of here's how you fix that, here's how you fix that, now go
Yep.
fix that,
Yep.
rather than sitting back and recognizing where we're at and what a phenomenal job the team members are doing.
Yeah. 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 Praise is just that important. It is as important as water.
And
Motivator number
especially
two. Go ahead.
giving them praise for recognizing that there is a problem. Like when a team member comes to me and says,
Mm.
hey, we've got a problem, we need to fix this, I typically go right into solution mode.
Yeah.
And now you're making me realize I should stop and say, great job in finding that problem. Let's talk through how to do that,
Yeah.
and use praise to just praise
Good
them for
catch.
finding the problem.
Exactly. It's a good catch.
Love it.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The second motivator is what I call redirect. And I use a field phone for that. Actually, this is like a 1989 cell phone, but no one really knows that. But
That does look like one.
with a field phone, the principle of redirect is that you use a field radio to offer troops on the ground accurate and timely communication to move closer to the objective. And without that, without good, solid communication, lives are lost and you lose battles.
Mm.
Again and again, we've proven that the importance of timely communication is essential for any victory. But it also suggests that the leader has a vantage point that the troops might not have, because he has the vision. He has an overall understanding of what that objective is. And sometimes we don't share that objective as clearly as we should with the troops, with our team. But it suggests that the troops would move, and they are willing to move if they're just told what's expected of them. And it also suggests the principle of continual coaching and training. But what happens too often in an office is that once everyone knows their job and once everything is running relatively smooth, we stop coaching, we stop training until everything starts to unravel again, and then we realize there's a need there. It really points to the need for metrics where people can manage themselves. And be managed by the objectives that have been set by the leader and the practice, so that they know where they are in relation to the objective itself. But in short, a leader never stops sharing their vision, ever, and they should encourage others to share and adopt that vision, and how they're contributing. Opportunities to contribute to that vision as well. That's what we spend too little time in a staff meeting. You mentioned fix-it mode as a doctor. That's really true. And then when we have nothing to fix, we think there's no reason to have a staff meeting or a team meeting. We should use those meetings where everything's running well and there's significant praise and reinforcement to go around. We should use those meetings to now begin cross-training and talking about vision and planning and strategic awareness for the rest of the year or next year. Or we should be spending it on marketing, where we're sharing vision in how we can promote what we have going for us. But we tend to stop communicating and stop coaching when everything is running well.
That
That
is a
makes sense?
phenomenal point. Yeah, I mean, absolutely. And my mind's running through different team meetings we've had, and I want to challenge our audience that's listening to ask yourself that question. When is the last time you had a team meeting that wasn't trying to put out fires? And the whole philosophy of Blue IQ, as you're implementing this into your practices, is to create this culture where the team expects to train. Like training is no different than getting up and exercising. We
Exactly.
exercise daily to maintain a level of fitness. We
Yeah.
train weekly to maintain this level of fitness within our practices. And
Yeah.
again, when is the last time you, as the leader of your practice, established that culture that Joseph just shared with us of cross training, of saying, man, we're all winning. All the metrics are looking beautiful. Let's now talk about how we can back up and support each other. And if I knew my team member had my back, like if I had to step away for an emergency or I had to go somewhere that they could step in and support me, what kind of culture would that breed in your practice?
Good point. I found that whenever I trained a member of the team, I would never do it isolated. I would never do it alone. I
Mm,
would always have everyone involved, even if I was training a certain phone procedure or maybe it was recare or scheduling. I needed everyone to understand what they do so that I was also creating a support system for helping everyone understand the responsibility that that individual has to make everything work. Because
I
if there
love it.
wasn't an essential position, it wouldn't be there. We don't
Yeah.
have extra layers of fat like corporate America does.
Right, right. No, I'm
It's
I'm
it's
with you.
slim. Yeah.
I'm with
So
you.
the third one is reprimand. And you might think, how in the world is reprimand a motivator? Well, the fact is, sometimes we all need to get the point. And that's a pretty dang sharp point when you think about it.
Yeah, that's a good
Um,
looking
this is a K bar. Oh, I could
K
talk
bar. I was going to ask
forever on
you.
the K bar. Yeah, we could talk
Yeah.
about this. But clearly reprimand is needed when someone doesn't respond to redirect. Uh, and there are some things that you do one time, and there is no opportunity for redirect. Embezzlement, for instance, is one of those. Uh, you,
Yeah,
you do it once, and you're gone. It's just, I mean,
yeah.
it's over. It's game over. But we use reprimand as a motivator, simply as a means of understanding that there is a need for discipline, and everyone needs to understand the point. However, there isn't anyone that's listening and no one presenting today that hasn't benefited in their life from a reprimand, as painful as it may have been. Some of our
Mhm.
greatest motivators in life can be a reprimand. And that does not mean that someone is terminal. If they require a reprimand and they're on the team, that doesn't mean that we're inches away from terminating them. Um, uh, and we don't have to do it in a way that destroys their dignity or their humanity. But it is necessary. And what we tend to do is forget that leadership adage of praising in public and reprimanding in private, which is
Mhm.
so essential to morale.
Yes.
Because if you destroy a person in the process of reprimand, you may have sealed their fate for never recovering, ever,
Yeah.
and becoming a valuable member of that team again. But there are things that happen in people's lives that take our focus away from the professional objective, in which they do need to understand that there's a very sharp point to our objective on a professional level, and they need to have that communicated to them. Um, but it's so rarely needed, so rarely needed. It's not something we use a lot. But when you think of this as a learning device or an object, there's also a very very sharp edge here, And that also lends itself to a measure of accountability. If people really understood the accountability that's placed on them. For instance, I just read an employee manual that had a drug use policy that was so clear that it was more than 11 pages long. Now that's understanding the objective and clearly outlining the measure of discipline and accountability that's there, so that if you need it, there is a very sharp edge to that policy, so that people, if they were to step off course, know where that line is.
Mm.
But we often don't get very clear on the objectives when we bring someone on board.
And that's a phenomenal point, Joseph. And again, after hiring and training hundreds and hundreds of team members, it's amazing how in the beginning of a new doctor's career, how you don't have very well established policy manuals. You're calling your friends and saying, "Hey, what are you using?
Yeah.
Can I get a copy of that policy manual?" Or
Yeah.
Googling, policy manual for dental office or chiropractic office or medical office. And it's vital if you're going to create the kind of culture that Joseph is sharing, where reprimand is minimally used. It will be minimally used because you've created a culture of accountability, which is what BlueIQ is all about.
Yep.
Clear vision, clear understanding for the team members, and clear policies in place that if they do step to that line, it actually becomes very easy to reprimand that team member because it's been established that that behavior is not tolerated.
Yes, well said, well said. But what we tend to do, for a number of reasons, one of them is that most of us don't like conflict. If we can avoid it, we will. We don't want to raise an issue. We don't want to hurt anyone's feelings, unless you're a doctor that really loves that. And then maybe, I suppose there are some who could fit that category. But for the most part, doctors are healers. They're not reaching for the weapons that will draw blood. But we tend to ignore vital indications that something's going wrong, hoping that it solves itself, and then we whip out the reprimand without thinking about opportunities to redirect along the way. We tend to go for blood too fast. Reprimand does not have to be painful to be effective.
Yeah, I love it. I think you're spot on.
And so now, you would not think that this is an entrenching tool. It's a little portable shovel, if you will, that you carry in your pack and weighs a lot more than you wish that it did until you actually need it.
Have to have it, yeah.
But it's more than just building latrines. It's actually a defensive weapon, because in certain types of combat, your only chance of survival is to dig a trench or a foxhole or something large enough where you can get below the surface of the ground, and then you do nothing. Generally, it's even face first. If we're talking nuclear warfare, you bury your head. That's your only chance of survival. And yet, when we think about that as a motivator, it's really kind of hard to connect the two. Well, let me put it this way. There is certainly a valid use for silence in leadership, because sometimes the best thing you can do is do nothing. But it's rare. If you know that an employee that she knows what time she's supposed to come to work, but everyone knows the pressure she's under. Not every infraction, not every mistake needs to be addressed. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just let it go, because they know that what they did was wrong, and we all make mistakes. But silence lends itself to suggesting that we are relationship based versus regulation based. The Marine Corps is very regulation, because they have to be. But in business, in healthcare management, it's a little different because if you're dealing with highly trained professionals that all know what's expected of them, every
Mm.
one of us need to be cut some slack sometimes. Not every not everything requires, you know, to make an issue of it. Does that make sense? I mean, have
I
there
think
been
that's a
times when it's just the right thing to do is just let it go?
I think it's a phenomenal point because we talk about how our patients are first, right? Patients first. Customers always right. Patients are right.
Yeah.
But there's been a big change in that in the last year or two of how our team members are first. And when people start using accountability software, which I don't like to call BlueIQ that, BlueIQ, the byproduct of using it is
Hmm.
accountability rises.
Hmm. Hmm.
But that's not our focus. Our focus isn't to hold a team member, accountable. That's just the byproduct of being able to have clear expectations. And so, but recognizing that we're all trying to perform, we're all trying to produce the vision, and that we all do have lives outside of this, and we're all trying to become the human beings we're trying to become. And there's going to be moments. Now, obviously, if they're repeated and they continue to happen, that's another story. That's not what Joseph's talking about. It's that one time when the crisis was too heavy to bear and it
Yeah.
bled into work a little bit.
Yeah.
Yes?
When you know that they know, and
Yeah.
everyone does. But when you
Yeah.
add that additional layer of patient interaction, that is a complicated layer with sometimes tremendous stress, with people who are at their worst when they're coming to see you. And that creates a level of complexity in which some people just need to be given the benefit of the doubt.
Can I give just a quick example, Joseph? I was working with a clinic where they brought on a new team member, and she hadn't been with them that long, but she was doing great.
Hmm.
And come to find out, as they got to know her a little bit better, she was going through some hard times. She was actually struggling, and her marriage had several children. And as the holidays approached, there were the team kind of found out that there were some financial struggles, and she wasn't really going to be able to provide much Christmas for her children. And and because she'd been a little late here and there, well, nothing real frequent, but that the team could see that she was struggling. And again, this is a newer team member. She hadn't been there for years. Because the culture this practice had established, the team, not even bringing management into it,
Hmm.
the team
Hmm.
got together, poured in some money, took that money to then leadership and said, hey, we're doing this for this team member. We've raised this much money. Would you mind contributing? It wasn't going to the team, to the doctor and saying, how much do you think you could give? They were
Uh-huh.
showing that they had put together out of their own money a couple $100s. And
Wow.
the doctor was like, oh my God, absolutely contributed. They put the money together, bought gift cards, put it together for a Christmas or a Christmas card, and anonymously put it on her desk and just let it be.
Wow.
And I'll tell you, that's the culture. What that did for that new team member to welcome them into the family and make them want to rise to the occasion and produce and contribute to the vision and
Hmm.
and not let home bleed into the workspace
Hmm.
was unbelievable.
Mm.
Unbelievable.
Mm. It would have sealed a measure of loyalty that nothing else may have ever done. That's leadership. That is
Yeah,
leadership. How beautiful. So let's tie it all together, Corey.
you got it.
The problem is that we tend to overuse two of these critical motivators more than the others, and we ignore others as much as we shouldn't. Um, we overuse silence. We use silence when we shouldn't, because we're really just ignoring something that requires some communication and
Yeah.
some redirect. Um, where we and if we ignore it long enough, what we find is now we have to whip out the knife. Now it's time to draw blood because we've ignored this too long. We've even got emotion wrapped up into it because how dare they be late for the third time? They know. And then we go right for the jugular. It doesn't have to be that way. And we also, the one that we should overuse is praise, but we underuse praise as the great motivator that it is. And there's just never a time when communication and redirect is probably inappropriate, unless it's the one rare time that silence is actually appropriate. Now, the reason silence is there as a critical motivator is because if it's used right, it can do so much, but it's often overused. It's often something we use because we lack the courage to do what we need to do in spending the time, whether it be a reprimand or a continual redirect in communication. So if you know how to use these tools, these critical motivators, you can lead a team that will literally walk through a firestorm for you in helping you achieve your objective and the objectives of the practice on behalf of patients. You misuse them, and you misuse them too often, there's nothing that will demoralize your team faster, and they'll ultimately leave and move on to another purpose that they can adopt that's less threatening. So those are the four motivators.
Beautifully said, Joseph. And that's what Blue IQ is all about, bringing you guys the leadership tools that you need, recognizing the tools that you have, giving you this tool to help you train your leadership team so that each of you can reach and explode your visions and make them materialize and become reality. You've been with us watching In the Blue on Fridays. Again, we're 9 Pacific, 12 Eastern, here every Friday. We're grateful that you joined with us today. Please, come back. We are here to help you build the practice of your dreams, and grateful that you've joined us again, Joseph. Fantastic job today. Thank you.
Glad to be here. Thank you.